If you have been seeing headlines saying Trump wants a $100,000 H-1B fee and a wage-based H-1B lottery, you are not alone. And with the H-1B 2026 cap season approaching, I know the bigger question behind the headline is this: is the H-1B program about to become impossible for normal employers and impossible to plan for as an applicant? By the end of this video, you will have three things. First, what we can actually verify right now versus what is still political talk or a proposal. Second, who would be affected and who would not, including cap-exempt employers, H-1B extensions, and people moving from F1 OPT. And third, a practical checklist for employers and applicants to prepare for the 2026 lottery season without making panic moves that backfire. Here is the part most people miss. Even dramatic-sounding ideas do not become reality overnight. But uncertainty alone can change employer behavior, and that can affect your chances. So we are going to separate noise from signals, and then focus on what you can control. Let us start with the headline itself. The claim floating around is a push for a $100,000 H-1B filing fee and a shift to wage-based selection priority. Important: unless and until something is issued through an official process, treat this as reported and under discussion, not a confirmed rule. You should not make irreversible decisions based only on a viral clip, a tweet, or a single article. Now, what do we know in general about how changes like this would happen? H-1B is governed by statutes passed by Congress, regulations from DHS and USCIS, and related Department of Labor requirements like the labor condition application and prevailing wage rules. A new fee of that scale, or a completely redesigned selection system, would typically require either new legislation, formal rulemaking, or a combination, plus time for implementation guidance. That is why the most practical approach for 2026 is planning for multiple scenarios. No major changes, incremental changes, or a bigger change that comes with a transition period. Here is a quick refresher on the H-1B lottery, because a lot of confusion comes from people mixing up registration, selection, and petition filing. For cap-subject H-1B, employers first submit an electronic registration during the registration window. USCIS runs a selection process, often called the lottery, because demand exceeds the annual cap. If the registration is selected, the employer can file the full H-1B petition with supporting documents, including specialty occupation evidence and the certified LCA. The lottery is at the registration stage, not the petition stage. That distinction matters because proposals could target either the registration process, the selection criteria, or the costs and requirements for the petition filing. Now let us get very clear on who is affected versus who is not, because this is where people waste time and money. A cap-subject H-1B is the classic case. Most private employers, most first-time H-1B workers, and many people moving from F1 OPT into H-1B. If the conversation is about the H-1B lottery for 2026, that primarily targets cap-subject cases, who is usually not in the same bucket? Cap-exempt employers like many universities, nonprofit research organizations, and certain affiliated entities. People who are already in H-1B status and filing an extension with the same employer are generally not going through the cap again. Many people changing employers are doing an H-1B transfer, which is not cap subject if they were already counted. Also, people doing amendments for changes in worksite or duties are not cap subject in the same way. Here is the micro hook. Two groups are at highest risk of being confused by these headlines. Group 1 is F1 students on OPT or STEM OPT, who think any H-1B news applies to them equally, when the key question is whether you are entering the cap-subject lottery for the first time. Group 2 is employers who are already cap-exempt and panic, even though their channel may not use the cap lottery at all. Now, what does wage-based selection mean in plain English? It usually means prioritizing registrations where the job offer corresponds to higher wage levels under the prevailing wage system, rather than a purely random selection among eligible registrations. Supporters argue it would favor higher-paid, higher-skilled roles. Critics argue it could disadvantage early career workers, smaller employers, and certain regions where wages are lower even for legitimate specialty occupations. And there is a practical detail that changes everything. Wage systems are not just one number. Wage levels can vary by location, job category, and the way a position is classified. So any wage-based system would have to define exactly which wage reference is used, at what stage, and how it is verified. If that sounds messy, it can be. Here is a myth versus reality moment. Myth: a wage-based lottery would automatically eliminate fraud and automatically select the best candidates. Reality: it might change incentives, but it can also create new gamesmanship around job titles, locations, and wage level classifications. And it may shift behavior rather than eliminate bad behavior. Another myth versus reality. Myth: USCIS can just flip a switch next month and run a totally different selection system for 2026. Reality: major process changes typically require public steps and lead time, even if agencies move quickly. The practical takeaway is to watch for official notices, not commentary. Now let us talk about the $100,000 fee idea. Even without confirming any particular number, we can analyze the impact of a very large filing fee proposal. If the price tag for sponsoring an H-1B jumped dramatically, it would likely do three things. First, it would reduce the number of employers willing to sponsor, especially small and mid-sized companies. Second, it would push employers to be extremely selective about which roles and which candidates they sponsor, and how early they start the process. Third, it could change the bargaining dynamics for workers, because fewer employers would be in the market. Here is the part most people miss. Even if a fee like that never becomes official, the discussion can still cause employers to hesitate, delay offers, or shift hiring to other countries or other visa categories. That is why the planning checklist later is so important. Also, remember that the H-1B process already has real costs: legal fees, internal HR time, Department of Labor compliance steps, USCIS filing fees, and potential premium processing. So a dramatic increase would be additive to an already expensive and compliance-heavy process. Let us ground this with an example scenario. Example scenario 1. You are an F1 student on OPT, and you have one shot at the 2026 registration because your OPT clock is limited. Your employer is willing to sponsor, but they are reading about huge new fees and wage-based selection, and they are unsure whether it is worth registering you. In this scenario, your best move is not to argue about politics. Your best move is to make it easy for the employer to say yes. Provide a clean timeline. Confirm your work authorization dates. Highlight the specialty occupation alignment, and encourage them to speak with immigration counsel early enough to avoid last-minute mistakes. Also, you should have a parallel plan. If not selected, what is your backup timeline for STEM OPT, another status, or an overseas transfer? We will cover a decision tree at the end. Example scenario 2. A small employer in a lower-cost city is comparing two candidates and worries a wage-based selection system could disadvantage them. Their best move is to ensure their wage determination and job classification are correct and well documented, and to consider whether the role truly meets specialty occupation requirements. If a wage-based system ever arrives, documentation and classification discipline will matter even more, because inconsistencies can trigger questions later. Now let us talk real-world consequences if proposals like these move forward in any form. 1. Timelines could tighten. Employers may start the process earlier, and applicants may see hiring decisions happen months ahead of the registration window. 2. Selection strategies could shift. If wage level mattered, employers might adjust offers, locations, or role levels, but that comes with compliance risk. 3. We could see demand surge. When people fear restrictions, more employers register, and that can increase competition, even without any rule change. 4. We could see spillover into other categories. Employers might look harder at cap-exempt options. O1 for extraordinary ability where appropriate. L1 for intra-company transfers. TN for eligible Canadian and Mexican professionals or remote employment abroad. Those are not interchangeable, and each has its own eligibility rules, but the trend is real. Here is another micro-hook. A small detail changes everything, whether you are cap subject this year. If you are already counted under the cap, many of these lottery-focused headlines do not apply to you the same way. Now we get to the practical part. What to do now, without panic. I will split this into employers and applicants, and I will keep it in a do this and avoid this format. For employers, do this. Start internal planning early. Identify which roles need H-1B sponsorship and confirm they are specialty occupation appropriate. Do this. Inventory your candidate pipeline and deadlines, especially for F1 OPT and STEM OPT end dates. Do this. Budget conservatively. Even if the $100,000 figure is not real, fees and compliance costs can change over time, so build flexibility into hiring plans. Do this. Clean up job descriptions. Align duties, required degree fields, and level of responsibility. Ambiguity is what triggers RFEs and delays. Do this. Talk to immigration counsel early about registration strategy and compliance, including wage levels, worksite locations, and remote work policies. Now avoid this. Avoid promising candidates that sponsorship is guaranteed. Avoid this. Avoid putting a random high salary on an offer letter just to chase a theoretical wage-based priority. That can create internal pay equity issues and compliance headaches. Avoid this. Avoid multiple registrations through related entities or questionable arrangements. USCIS has been focusing on integrity in the registration process, and shortcuts can backfire. Avoid this. Avoid waiting until the last minute to gather documents, because that is when errors happen. For applicants, do this. Ask early and ask clearly. If you need H-1B sponsorship for 2026, communicate that upfront with recruiters and managers. Do this. Keep your documents organized. Passport validity, I-20 history if you are F1, EAD dates, I-94 records, prior approvals if any. Do this. Understand your timeline. If you are on OPT, know your expiration date and whether you qualify for STEM OPT. Do this. Build a backup plan that does not depend on one lottery result. That might mean timing your STEM OPT, exploring cap-exempt roles, or planning an overseas assignment that could later support an L1 if you truly qualify. Avoid this. Avoid relying on social media claims that a fee or rule is already in effect. Verify using official sources like USCIS announcements and the Federal Register for rules. Avoid this. Avoid paying anyone who promises a guaranteed selection. The H-1B selection process is not something a third party can sell you. Avoid this. Avoid making travel plans that assume an H-1B approval timeline you do not have yet. Here is a myth versus reality that affects applicants directly. Myth. If wage-based selection happens, early career applicants should give up. Reality. Nothing is final, and even in a wage-focused environment, many legitimate early career roles are paid appropriately for their level and location. Your focus should be eligibility, documentation, and timing, not doom scrolling. Now, what should you watch next, specifically? Watch for any official USCIS or DHS statements about the H-1B registration process for FY 2026, including instructions that mention selection criteria. Watch for any formal rulemaking notices, because that is where details and timelines appear. Watch for employer-facing signals. Are companies accelerating recruiting timelines, increasing use of cap-exempt pathways, or shifting to overseas hiring? And watch your own risk points, OPT end dates, graduation dates, and whether your employer has a history of successful filings. If you are a hiring manager, watch your internal bottlenecks, wage approvals, job leveling, and remote work policies. This is where people get denied, not because of a headline, but because the job description, degree requirement, wage level, and worksite facts do not line up cleanly. Now let us address the big emotional question. Is the visa program over? No one can honestly say that from a proposal headline. The H-1B program has changed many times over decades through enforcement priorities, adjudication trends, and policy shifts. What does change quickly is uncertainty, and uncertainty changes behavior. So the healthiest approach is assume the 2026 season will be competitive, assume documentation scrutiny stays high, and assume you need a Plan A and Plan B. Now here is a simple decision tree you can use right now. If you are a first-time CAP subject candidate for 2026, your priority is employer commitment before the registration window, plus a backup status timeline if not selected. If you are cap-exempt, your priority is confirming the employer truly qualifies as cap-exempt and that the role meets H-1B requirements, because you may not need the lottery at all. If you are already in H-1B and you are extending or transferring, your priority is maintaining status, keeping records clean, and filing on time, because the lottery chatter is usually not your main issue. If you are an employer, your priority is compliance and timing, because last-minute filings are where mistakes and RFEs multiply. Two final things to keep your stress level under control. First, treat any specific number like $100,000 as unconfirmed unless it is supported by official documentation. Discuss it as a risk scenario, not as a fact. Second, focus on verifiable actions, preparing documents, budgeting, and monitoring official channels. Let us recap in 5 quick bullets. 1. The $100,000 H-1B fee and wage-based selection are being discussed in the public conversation, but you should treat them as reported proposals unless you see official action. 2. The people most affected by lottery changes are CAP subject first-time registrants, especially F1 OPT to H-1B candidates and their employers. 3. Cap-exempt cases and many extensions or transfers are often in a different bucket, so do not assume the headline applies to you. 4. Even without new rules, employer behavior can change, so start earlier, document better, and plan a backup. 5. Watch official USCIS and DHS guidance for FY 2026 details, not viral posts. If you found this helpful, subscribe and turn on notifications, because the moment we get verifiable USCIS guidance for the H-1B 2026 season, I will break down exactly what changed, who is affected, and the safest next steps. And if you are in the middle of planning right now, take a breath. Preparation beats panic every time.